Vision Law spent 25 grand on 2 webinars and 0 sales calls. Now, they had 4 people show up on the first webinar and 26 people show up on the second webinar, but still 0 calls. The story structure was solid, the content was good, but nobody booked. Here's what we were missing, and here's what we changed that made the difference that led them to close 7 clients out of just 8 sales calls from their webinar. Let's dive into it. The problem wasn't the story that we were telling on the webinar or the actual webinar content itself. It was the copy. We just weren't getting enough people to the webinar, and then the people that we were getting on the webinar weren't converting on the presentation. Now, by the end of this breakdown, you're going to understand exactly why that is, as well as the exact story structure that works the best for all the legal offers that we've worked with, as well as any risk-oriented offers. And you're going to understand why in those specific type of offers, when you're selling something that is downside protection, the specific story structure, how it is that you can illustrate that point, as well as why you need to focus on symptoms, as well as the consequences of those symptoms, versus selling your firm or selling how it is that you practice law or selling how it is that you do cybersecurity or any type of downside protection offer. This is the formula of how it is that you can sell scary or more risk protection oriented offers. So Scott, he spent $25,000 and got 0 sales calls. That's exactly what happened on the first 2 webinars. We had 4 people show up on the first one, 0 book calls. And then on the second one, we had 22 people show up, like I mentioned earlier. Now, I was confident in the story structure, but Scott Shibiyama from Vision Law was ready to pull the plug. Now, despite that, I knew the content was good, but we had to look at this in 2 different layers. So even if let's take a step back and let's look at what we did on the first between webinar 1 and webinar 2. If you're running B2B webinars and they're not converting, then I have a gift for you. Now, we run a masterclass every week, on Tuesdays, that showcases exactly how our webinar funnel is producing us over $238K per month. Now, if you want the 4-part breakdown of that, it's a free training, then go ahead, click the link in the description. You'll be prompted to register for the webinar, and then you'll receive the instructions of how to join in your inbox. So stay tuned for them. In this masterclass, we're going to break down exactly how you can find who's active in your market and ready to buy right now. We're going to break down exactly how you can send out hundreds of thousands of personalized invites every single week. And we're going to break down exactly how to make your webinar convert. And then lastly, we're going to be breaking down all the AI agents that go into the process. So go ahead, click the link below and register, and you'll receive all the joining instructions to your inbox, and I'll see you there. So here was the underperforming copy. As you can see, there's like 4 different, there's about 3 different angles here, right? We're focusing on personal liability, litigation, as well as shame in her community. And so we had taken a negative oriented case study and tried to sell that versus the benefits. And what happened here is that the framing of this, even though we led off with a negative case study, it was just still too positive. Looking back at this, as I was looking at the registrations and the amount of people who actually showed up, it was too positive and it was trying to do too much. And the thing you have to understand with great copy is that great copy can only focus on one thing. And in addition to that, we also included, everything that you think would work, that we added lead magnets on top of that, and it still didn't perform. So what we had done instead is we focused much more on the kinds of questions that business owners ask themselves. And this was an employment law offer for context. The type of questions that they ask themselves if they're worried about a disgruntled employee. And then if they're worried about it, how they then show up to speak and how they speak to that disgruntled employee. And then what are the consequences on it? And then we just quickly showed the case study was much less drawn out. It was just shorter, much to the point. We saved him $4.8 million in exposure and legal fees, like very direct to the point, speaking to business owners. And this copy is what drastically improved performance. It's worth noting that on the same, just simply doubling the amount of invites that we were sending out to the webinar, we 4x'd the registration rate by split testing winning copy. which copy would perform better. And then we 4x'd, even though we only doubled the amount of invites, we 4x'd the amount of total registrations. And as a direct, in addition to about a 50% lift on the show up rate, 4x the funnel, over 4x, 4.5x the amount of attendees, which then started producing booked calls. And so what's the key takeaway here? And when you're selling legal offers or risk-oriented offers, you have to focus on what are the types of things or questions that they have if they're worried about a situation? What are the things that they're asking themselves about? And then how is that showing up for them in their business? And how is it affecting them both personally and the impact on their business? Because if you don't clearly identify the consequences, how can you expect to change behavior? So what changed webinar to webinar that led to this big uptick in results? The first was leverage. Now, Scott, our client at Vision Law, believed that the best place that he could grow the business was by protecting his clients and still being in the delivery. And the truth is that he was ready to axe this funnel. Now, here's what shifted is he went from treating marketing and sales as a time suck and something that he couldn't afford to do into building the marketing machine. He started handing off the legal work to a servicing lawyer and then framed the handoff to his existing clients as a value add, as a benefit that, hey, you're actually getting two now for the price of one, because he's not going anywhere, which then freed his time up freed his calendar to be able to focus on practicing his presentation, right? It's one of the not sexy but boring things that makes money. For example, we had a webinar that we hosted, which had 257 people on it, and we booked 57 sales calls. Why? I spent 5 hours practicing it. And that's probably what it is that you want to hear. And it's probably not what, the 19-year-old kids telling you lawyers how to market on YouTube is going to tell you. This is what actually works. And this is what we want to deliver on this channel is like no BS, no bullshit fluff that you can implement into your business right now. So if you're running webinars, the key is to making sure that they're very conversion focused. And after Scott made that decision, that's exactly what he did. He initially thought that, hey, a tighter script is what we need. And actually what makes these online presentations or online ads convert higher is the energy and authenticity, right? The audience needs to feel like you actually care about this and that it's coming from the heart. It's not about the perfect word, because if you're reading off of a script, you sound like you're reading off of a script and the delivery is flat. Then what happens? The audience leaves. They have better things to do, because when you're running webinars, you're not competing against just other lawyers. You're competing against Alex Hormozi. You're competing against Kim Kardashian. You're competing against Netflix, because that's where everybody else's attention is going. You're competing against every other business influencer that there is out there. Now, when Scott dropped the script and he presented with real energy, he turned the heaviest points of the presentation into questions. So instead of telling people what to think, he was asking them and leading them to the same answer that he wanted to, right? And more specifically asking, hey, like instead of just telling them the cost of inaction, right? For those of you that are more marketing sophisticated, you know what I'm talking about. But what Scott did from Vision Law was that he asked them whether or not they wanted to pay six figures to clean up a mess that they could have entirely prevented. And that shifted the audience from trying to convince them to them having them sell themselves. Now, lastly, I have a gift for you guys. So I'm going to be breaking down, behind the scenes look at some of our SOPs and prompts. And what I'm going to be sharing with you here is the 5-part story structure. Actually, before I dive into this, the last thing that I forgot to mention this is that Scott from Vision Law's belief was that a strong offer at the end was enough, right? And that follow-up meant like a few emails. That was the only way to build trust, saving clients, right? But the reality is that bookings happen when you have a very challenging call to action, right? And they're more powerful even when you call out specific members of the audience. If you see people asking questions and then they haven't booked a call yet, you can follow up with, hey, such and such. Like, I saw that you asked this question. Go ahead, schedule a call. Go ahead, click the link below, find a time, select a time, schedule a call. We'll walk you through exactly how such and such part of the system will help you solve that problem. So key piece is calling in specific members of your audience when you're running a webinar, as well as using specific wording. So instead of making the client the hero, instead of making him the hero and say, oh yeah, we did this, this, and this, we did blah, 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 blah. Like nobody cares what you did. They care about themselves. They care about the success story. And so in order to make the case study more relatable, we changed the narrative and how we were explaining the case study. So we shifted from, we got client down from 5 million in exposure down to a $20,000 arbitration. We shifted that to Bill from the bakery went from 5 million in from class action exposure to an arbitration worth under 20 grand. And then we traced that win back to each part of his delivery process and his model of building up the legal infrastructure up front, showing exactly what went into that, showing the step-by-step process and exactly how the client did it. But instead of it, but not saying it as, oh, this is what we do and this is our system. It's what did the client do and leading with the result. So the audience saw their own personal choice as the lever that produced the outcome. And we framed Scott from Vision Law as being part of the supporting role. So the audience saw their own choices in being able to produce that outcome. Anyway, and you also want to have the call to action to be very specific. You want the call to action to be, as explicit as go ahead, click the link below, find a time, schedule a time, and then we'll go ahead and we'll send you XYZ bonuses. And I'm going to get into this in a moment with the prompt. So we have another prompt structure. Now, if you want to see the webinar framework that's made us and our clients over $20 million since the beginning of 2025, then go ahead and register for the webinar because I'm going to break it down. I'm going to break it down there. But in all seriousness, that framework works for about 80% of offers. But you can't market legal offers like you would any other offer. This is a big mistake that a lot of agency bros and kids watching how to make money online videos who are selling you a $2,500 a month agency retainer or 15 grand engagement, they're completely missing the mark on, because you just can't sell, unless it's personal injury, you just can't sell B2B legal or professional service offers the same way that you would an agency or make money type of offer. It's complete, because your value proposition is completely different. So here's the 5-part story structure that converts attendees or converts cold traffic into buyers, and exactly what we did on the webinar. So, and if you want access to the prompt as well, then join the webinar, because we give all the prompts away to people who join the webinar. And this is a prompt that I've spent close to a year refining and getting better and better. And it's one that we've used for about 20% of the 1,041 webinars that we've run for our clients since the beginning of January of last year. And the reason why it's 20% is because this is the story structure that works for B2B law firms. First is the hook. Right. In Scott's case, what we had done is we led with, here's how we reduced up to, $20 million in class action liability, right? Because the hook is a bold promise that opens with a physical cost that their brain just can't push up against, right? And what we had done is that we went very aggressive on this in the webinar, where we started mapping out, hey, the actual scene to present the pain. It's like Tuesday morning, a process server hands you a multi-million-dollar class action lawsuit from an employee you trusted, somebody who you thought was your friend. Now, what we had said is in 25 minutes, you'll know exactly how to take your exposure from wide open to near zero and keep your money. So that's the first part of this. Then we go into the broken practices, right? There's a couple other parts of the hook that are really important here, but first we talk about, then we talk about the broken best practices. And we talk about where the specific belief of the market is. Like, what does the market think is their problem, and how do they typically try to solve it? In this case, it's say, hey, with ChatGPT now, everybody thinks they're old. Or with, hell yeah, I can just look online or hire somebody on Upwork, and then painting the consequence of that. Because if you don't paint the consequence of it, how can people learn? How will people learn? They don't. So from here, you then have to talk about a specific scenario about it started with event. And then, what's the real metric that they care about, like dollars lost, profit lost, or conversation and then what they thought would happen versus what actually happened. And you always want to talk about the emotional cost. Reputational damage, lost clients, team morale. What are the tough conversations? What are the tough conversations of people in their orbit that they're being forced to have as a result of following standard practice or standard advice. And then which spirals into crisis. And in this case, this was the story we told was of a business owner named Lori who was about to lose their business. Who was going to completely lose their business. And they risked class action suit of 20 people for millions of dollars was a story that we told. And after all that, they still need to spend multiple years in the courts, and they still need to spend multiple years at court fighting this, taking them away from actually running their business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you always want to have real numbers, and you want to talk through the verbatim internal dialogue or conversation. And this won't just work for webinars. This will work for any marketing copy. So if you're running ads, if you're, running cold email, like this will work. This is the exact type of way that you have to market any type of legal offer. And then you really want to kind of stretch it out, right? It was inevitable, not preventable. Like you want to make the audience feel like they're watching a slow train wreck, because people love watching a train wreck, much as they don't want to admit it. And then we want them to think, oh my God, that could be me. And now here is where the story structure shifts, right? This is the second part of it. And that's the thesis, right? The fork in the road. What would have happened? What would have happened if they took a different path? And in this case, it's what would, smart business owners pay for smart business owners do the legal work up front was the framing we had used. And you can use that framing for any type of B2B offer. You're welcome. Now, from here, the fork in the road is then when we present them the reframe of how it is that they're thinking about this, right? Like I said earlier, versus the dream path. And this is extremely important, guys. And if you get anything out of this video, let it be this, is that you have to have the nightmare contrasted with the dream path and the dream scenario. Why? Why does it matter? Well, our brains as humans are really bad at extrapolation. And so the only way for you to be able to communicate to human beings the consequences of their actions is to show them a side-by-side contrast of a nightmare scenario versus a dream scenario. And so in this dream path, like I said earlier, I talked a little bit about this with the class action liability and how we reduce that to almost zero, and how the steps, the exact legal infrastructure that Bill set up, like the 3-part legal infrastructure that Bill from the bakery set up in order to reduce his $5 million class action liability down to almost zero. And in this section, you really want to go through their specific, you want to bring up the avatar again. You want to then say, no, they were a smart business owner that did the legal work up front. And then you want to go through weeks of how long it took them to take, and then what the result was of that. Like, hey, it takes X amount of time, which led to Y result. And you want to mirror the outcome, the dream outcome versus the nightmare story, like the exact steps, because of contrast bias. It's the same thing of, it's the same reason why before and after photos at the gym are so effective, is because you can see it in an instant. And that's exactly what this story structure does. And just by correcting the delivery on this is what led Scott Shibayama to close 7 out of 8 of his sales calls into paying clients for tens of thousands of dollars each year. You always want to tell this through the lens of a person. It can never be in the abstract, showing them the exact steps, like step 1, step 2, and then tying that back to the old problem. Right. As in this case, it was, just assume that just treat people right and you'll be taken care of. You'll be okay. No, you need to have X, Y, Z, forms in place, not a lawyer. So, friendly disclaimer. And then lastly is you want to have a strong call to action. So step number 1 is the outcome / value, 30 seconds, right? Write the invitation where you say, this is a working session. You frame the sales call as a value add, as well as what it is that you're going to be building out for them as part of the sales process. And if you don't have something like a proposal that you're framing as a value add on the side of the sales process, then you're leaving tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on the table. Because a lot of professional service providers just say, okay, we'll send you a retainer agreement without actually framing that as valuable. Professional service providers, and I have bad news for you, with companies like General Legal coming out, they're coming for your lunch with AI offers, right? With AI native firms, excuse me. So it's like flat fee pricing, where you're going to be under huge threat to not be a commodity, to stand out. Right? You have to stand out. And webinars are the best way in 2026 to do that and to build a personal brand. So if you're not framing the world is never going back to the way it was. Pandora's box is open. And for the professional services businesses that don't adapt and don't give a higher touch customer success or customer journey, you're going to get cut. And so the framing of the proposal is also very important. You don't want to just frame it as a retainer agreement or proposal. You want to frame it as a specific build or a specific map. Like you want to frame it as you're helping them deliver a specific outcome. And what is it that they're walking away with from the call? And you always want to say whether we work together or not, this is something that you can use and apply into your business today. And then how do you get it? With a call to action, it's very important to be very clear. There's a great marketing book on this called Don't Make Me Think. And in it talks about how you have to give people a step-by-step call to action. So click the link, find a time, select a time, schedule it in, and then you'll receive XYZ bonus. And you always want to give bonuses, right? I've given you a couple. Case in point for joining the webinar. You want access to this prompt? Join the webinar. If you want the $20 million webinar playbook, go ahead, register for the webinar. It's the same. It's the same process that you want to implement. But Scott, I don't have any lead magnets. That's a separate conversation. But you absolutely want to start thinking about what are the extra pieces that you can offer. And I can make a whole video on a whole other 30-minute video on lead magnets. And then you want real urgency or scarcity, right? You never want to add a call to action that says, oh yeah, we only take on like 5 clients a month, and then have that be total BS. Like it has to be real. Otherwise people will smell it out. And it's also just not the right thing to do. So if you do have limited slots, or if there's a reason why you have limited slots, like in our case, we can only take on 2 to 3 clients. You can only onboard 2 to 3 clients every single week. So we can't actually onboard more than 3 clients. Because we only have 3 onboarding slots available now, and those usually fill out by Thursday, for example. So before Thursday, we say, in order to get you in and kick off on Monday, we only have 2 to 3 onboarding slots, just because of our coaches' availability and our team's availability, and we don't want to sacrifice quality ever or speed in order to help our clients get results. That's an example of a real scarcity constraint that we have in our business in order to preserve quality and speed. Social proof as well. This is the most important thing. If you can start seeing other people booking, put it in the chat, put it on your webinar. Talk about, hey, such and such has actually booked a time. And then you always want to be very direct in the call to action. And so this is the 5-part story structure that led to Scott Shipiyama converting 7 out of those 8 sales calls that he had booked into paying clients that led to tens of thousands of dollars a year in revenue. Now, that's one part of it. The other part is how you present, right? The energy of it, and showing up authentically, making sure that it's not coming off as scripted. And then as well, you want to focus on what's the internal dialogue that your audience is having. And for most of these downside or risk prevention type of offers, having it be symptoms focused of what are they thinking about, what are the potential conversations, or what's actually happening for them, and the consequences of ignoring those symptoms, and being really focused on those. So that said, you want to see exactly how in the results of the funnel that I just broke down in the webinar funnel that I just shared, then go ahead and click the link or click the video above to watch the actual interview with Scott from Vision Law, and I'll see you there.